Before we get into this, real quick, if you enjoy calm, honest NBA breakdowns without fake drama or clickbait narratives, make sure you're subscribed. This channel is all about understanding what's actually happening behind the headlines. Now let's talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo, because once again, the conversation around him just took another sharp turn. According to a recent report, Giannis is fully committed to the Milwaukee Bucks and plans to stay there for the rest of his career. He even went on record saying, "There will never be a chance, and there will never be a moment that I come out and say I want to trade. That's not who I am. I'm invested in this team. I'm not going anywhere." And on the surface, that sounds definitive. It sounds like the conversation should be over. No trade, no drama. Case closed. But here's the thing. This is exactly why the Giannis situation refuses to go away, because just weeks ago, this same situation looked completely different. Reports surfaced about off-season meetings between Giannis and the Bucks front office to discuss his future. Not normal exit interviews, serious conversations about direction, commitment, and long-term plans. Around the league, there were also quiet but real trade discussions involving Milwaukee and other teams. Whether those talks went anywhere or not isn't the point. The point is, they existed. And when a franchise player's future is being discussed, that alone creates noise. Now let's be very clear about something important. Giannis has never publicly asked for a trade. That part is true. He has never stood at a podium and demanded out. He has never posted a goodbye message. He has never pulled a hard exit. And by his own words, he never will. That aligns with who he's always been, reserved, careful, and very aware of how he's perceived. But here's where things get complicated. Saying "I will never ask for a trade" is not the same thing as saying "I will sign every extension put in front of me." Those are two very different commitments. And this is where fans, media, and even teams sometimes talk past each other. Giannis saying he wants to retire in Milwaukee sounds comforting. But the real decision point isn't a quote, it's the contract. When the extension becomes available, that's when everything gets real. Because if Giannis signs it, the conversation ends immediately. Milwaukee relaxes, the league moves on, loyalty confirmed. But if he doesn't sign it, then the Bucks are officially on the clock. At that point, Milwaukee has to ask a brutal question. Do we risk losing a generational player for nothing? Or do we act early and control the outcome? And notice something important here. In that scenario, Giannis never has to ask for a trade. The decision shifts to the franchise. He keeps his word. The Bucks protect their future. Everyone saves face. That's how leverage works in the modern NBA. This is why these comments matter, even if they sound simple on the surface. It's also why this situation was never going to be resolved mid-season. Trading a player of Giannis's caliber in the middle of the year is nearly impossible. Salaries, draft capital, roster timing, it's a logistical nightmare. And Milwaukee has shown no urgency to move him right now anyway. This was always going to be an off-season question, tied directly to that extension decision. So when people say the media made this up, that's not entirely accurate. The confusion didn't come from nowhere. It came from mixed signals, from meetings behind closed doors, and from a team stuck between competing now and planning for what comes next. Giannis wasn't loud about it. He wasn't dramatic, but he also wasn't crystal clear. And in today's NBA, ambiguity creates chaos. For now, though, one thing is clear. Giannis isn't being traded this season. The Bucks are moving forward. Other storylines are taking over. And this chapter is being temporarily shelved. But don't confuse quiet with resolved, because when that extension hits the table, everything we're talking about right now comes rushing back, louder than ever. And that's where the real decision begins. At this point, whether Giannis ever formally requested a trade almost doesn't matter anymore. Maybe he asked and the Bucks shut it down. Maybe Milwaukee explored the market quietly and didn't like what they saw. Maybe both sides danced around the idea without ever saying it out loud. We'll probably never know the exact version of that story. What we do know is this. The idea of Giannis not being a Milwaukee Buck was genuinely on the table. It wasn't fantasy, it wasn't fan fiction, and it wasn't invented out of thin air. Giannis himself entertained it, through meetings, through timing, and through public behavior that left plenty of room for interpretation. And even if someone wants to argue that point, there's one thing that simply can't be debated. Giannis was a massive distraction for this team. That wasn't media created. That wasn't reporters stirring the pot. That came from Giannis's own actions, the ambiguity, the meetings, the non-answers, the timing. When the face of your franchise becomes a question mark, everything else freezes. That's why what just happened matters more than people realize. By making it clear that he will not request a trade, Giannis effectively closed the door for the rest of the league. Teams now know this isn't happening. Not this season. Not at the deadline. And once that clarity hit, the league finally started to move. Assets that were being quietly held back can now be deployed elsewhere. Front offices no longer have to play the "what if Giannis becomes available" game. That waiting period is a big reason why things were so quiet before the recent wave of movement. Teams don't want to spend draft capital or cap flexibility if there's even a small chance a top 5 player could shake loose. Now that chance is gone. So everyone moves on. Milwaukee, however, doesn't get to move on so easily. What moving forward looks like for the Bucks is painfully familiar. It means aggressively adding around Giannis without actually changing their ceiling. It means chasing names like Zach LaVine or Jerami Grant. It means rearranging contracts, not reshaping reality. There are even theoretical scenarios where Milwaukee could pursue someone like Anthony Davis. Yes, on paper, there are versions of a deal that work financially, involving players like Miles Turner, Bobby Portis, Kyle Kuzma, and future picks. Technically, it's possible, but realistically, it's not happening. If a team like Dallas ever decided to move Anthony Davis, there are far better offers available across the league. Milwaukee simply doesn't have the asset base to win that bidding war. Taking on multiple long-term contracts and limited picks isn't good value for a franchise looking to reset or retool. So, while it's an interesting idea, it's not a serious one. Which brings us back to the most likely outcome. The Bucks get past the trade deadline. The roster looks mostly the same, just shuffled. Giannis is still there. Ryan Rollins is still developing. Kevin Porter Jr. is still inconsistent, and 1 or 2 high-usage scorers get added to give the illusion of progress. That team will win a couple of impressive games, and then drop baffling losses to teams they shouldn't even be competing with. Every night becomes a health watch, because if Giannis goes down again, the entire structure collapses instantly. Then comes the offseason. That's when the extension gets placed on the table. And Giannis looks at the roster. He looks at the age curve. He looks at the lack of draft control. He looks at the short-term fixes being sold as long-term answers. And that's the moment where loyalty stops being about words and starts being about winning. Maybe he says no and plays it out. Maybe he pushes it to free agency. Maybe Milwaukee dares itself to hold on and hopes emotion wins over logic. But there's no realistic scenario where adding these pieces, even a risky star, suddenly convinces Giannis that this is a championship environment for the rest of his prime. And this is the truth that keeps getting buried. Giannis can say whatever he wants publicly. He can talk about loyalty. He can talk about retiring in Milwaukee. That's fine. But his loyalty to winning has always come first. And eventually, that loyalty demands a decision. This pattern didn't start yesterday. It's been part of Giannis's career for years now. Every time the situation reaches a boiling point, it plays out the same way. The pressure builds, the uncertainty grows, and then the Bucks make a move. Just enough to convince him to stay a little longer. Not because the roster suddenly becomes perfect, but because it keeps the dream alive. The problem is, that strategy has finally hit its limit. This roster has reached critical mass. There's no reshuffle, no mid-tier star, no short-term swing that realistically changes the outcome anymore. Even if Milwaukee adds players like Zach LaVine, Jerami Grant, or even someone with the talent level of Anthony Davis, there's still a hard truth staring everyone in the face. This is not a championship environment long-term. At some point, reality cuts through hope. And when Giannis sits down with that extension in front of him, that's when the decision becomes unavoidable. He's already said he will never ask for a trade. Fine. Take him at his word. But here's the part that matters. If you don't sign the extension, you're effectively forcing the same outcome, because the Bucks are not going to let this drag all the way to the summer of 2027 with Giannis walking straight into free agency. That would be organizational malpractice. The second that extension goes unsigned, the entire league will know exactly what time it is. And trust this, Teams won't be guessing. Big market franchises will immediately start clearing cap space. Front offices will plan years ahead. Max slots will magically appear. Everyone will understand the timeline a full season in advance. That's how this league works. Silence becomes the loudest signal of all, which is why the public messaging doesn't really change the math. You can say you don't want to be traded. You can say you want to retire in one place. You can say all the right things. But the NBA doesn't operate on quotes. It operates on contracts. And until that extension is signed, nothing is settled. So what does the rest of this season realistically look like for Milwaukee? They hover around the play-in. They make one aggressive but limited move. They win a few games that make people say, see, they're still dangerous. And then they lose games that remind everyone exactly who they are. If they make the playoffs, it's likely a short run. First round, maybe second if everything breaks perfectly, and then we're right back here. Because when the offseason arrives, the same questions resurface, only louder. That extension date becomes the focal point of the entire league. And once again, Giannis's future dominates every conversation. Now, to be fair, there is a world where all of this is wrong. There is a scenario where Giannis truly is the most loyal superstar this league has ever seen. A player who doesn't care about roster construction, timelines, or odds. A player who values one city above all else, no matter the circumstances. And if that's the case, then these comments make perfect sense. But belief in that version of reality requires proof. And in the NBA, proof comes in ink. Until that extension is signed, skepticism isn't disrespect. It's logic. Because everything we've seen so far suggests that Giannis's loyalty to winning has always been stronger than his loyalty to any logo. That doesn't make him a villain. It makes him human. It makes him competitive. So yes, he may never ask for a trade. But eventually, a decision will still be made. And when it is, no quote from today will matter nearly as much as the signature or lack of one that comes next.